Well, shalom. I remember when I first started learning about Yahweh's calendar back in the mid to late 1990s. And my first Passover was in 1998, spring of 1998. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I was so joyous that I was doing it. I had read about the Passover in the scriptures. I had saw where all the prophets kept the Passover, and the apostles, and even our master himself kept Passover, and I was keeping Passover. It had messianic significance. I knew 1 Corinthians 5 and was so excited and overjoyed about keeping the Passover. The biggest two festivals that the Christian church celebrates, Easter and Christmas, I couldn't find in the Bible. Now, I thought it was strange that if Easter and Christmas are huge, important Christian feasts, why in the world are they not recorded in the book of Acts or any of the New Testament epistles? It seemed to me that Christmas would have been celebrated by somebody at that time, since Yeshua had been born, and what we read about in, let's say, Luke chapter 2 had already taken place. Same thing goes with Easter. Yeshua resurrected from death, ascended into heaven, so why didn't the apostles celebrate Easter Sunday? The best explanation that I was given was that these feasts were later developments of Christian theology. Okay, but the apostles and earliest Christians still didn't celebrate them, right? Now, in the midst of my studies about Christian feasts and holidays, I eventually came to New Year's. Here in my home state of Georgia, every December the 31st, thousands of people drive out to downtown Atlanta to watch this giant peach drop at the stroke of midnight. And just thinking about all the traffic in the cold at midnight scares me. I do remember staying up at my granddaddy's house until midnight when I was a teenager and watching that peach drop on the TV screen. And then it was all over. Everybody would say Happy New Year, and we'd go to bed. I never even gave the January 1st New Year a second thought. It came, I'd say Happy New Year. It wasn't until I started to study Yahweh's calendar that I began to ask myself, where did this come from? And I never would have thought or never knew that it was tied to this old Roman two-faced God. You heard me right. Let me explain. The name January comes from the Latin language, and it stands for Janus or Januarius with our anglicized J. Janus was the deity of new beginnings and gates and doors because they swung both ways. He was often worshipped at birthdays and weddings. He was sometimes depicted with the number 300 in one hand and the number 65 in the other hand. And he had two faces, one to take out the old year and one to bring in the new. But Janus did not always begin the new year, even for the Romans. Have you ever wondered why our month of October is the 10th month on our current American calendar? I mean, an octagon has 8 sides, an octopus has 8 legs. All words beginning with oct have something to do with the number 8, because oct is a Latin-derived prefix meaning 8. Why then is October the 10th month instead of the 8th month? The answer is that October used to be the 8th month. The same holds true for other months. Sept in Latin means 7, oct means 8, nov means 9, and dec means 10. The months of September through December were named such because anciently they had a different number place in the year. The Roman poet Ovid, who lived from 43 BC to 17 AD, wrote a poetic treatment of the Roman year titled Fasti, a Latin word in the plural referring to a chronological or calendar-based list. He only wrote of the first half of the year, and although it is believed he planned to finish the latter half of the year, he never did. According to Ovid, the ancient Roman year began in March and consisted of 10 months, ending in December. What we now call January and February were originally just looked at as blank time that passed until the new year began.
Ovid writes in Book 3 that a year was counted when the moon had returned to the full for the 10th time. That number was then in great honor, whether because that is the number of fingers by which we are wont to count, or because a woman brings forth in twice 5 months, or because the numerals increase up to 10, and from that we start a fresh round. In the same book he explains that the calends of March were really the beginning of the year, and that the years of old began with March. The word calends has to do with the proclamation of a new moon at the beginning of a month. The Romans originally used the moon to determine the months of the year. This means that the original March 1 would always land on a new moon, and that the new moon would begin the year. In Book 1, Ovid explains that the new year used to begin in the springtime, when all things flower, and new from out the teeming vine shoot swells the bud, in fresh formed leaves the tree is draped, and from earth's surface sprouts the blade of corn. All this info lets us know that March 1, originally a new moon, must have been around the time of the spring equinox, what we now generally call March 21. A new year in the springtime makes sense. Everything comes back to life. I usually have to start mowing my grass at the end of March because it begins to grow after laying dormant from late fall through winter. The trees start coming to life, flowers bud, bees and birds are everywhere, and the weather improves. This makes all the sense in the world. Not only does it make common sense to begin the new year in spring, this is the way Yahweh set up his calendar in Scripture. According to Exodus 12 through 13, the month of Abib is the head of the year. Abib refers to the ears of barley grain that are growing at that time, from small tiny ears in the north to fully developed ears in the south. Abib barley is harvested in the springtime when everything is being renewed. Passover is kept in this month along with the festival of unleavened bread. So the scriptural new year begins in the spring, not in the winter. Why would we think a new year should begin in winter anyhow? Everything is dead, the weather's cold, oftentimes snow is on the ground, you can't see the grass, all the leaves are off the trees, sap is down in the trees, there are no flowers, the bees are not buzzing, the birds have flown further south to stay warm. This seems like the weirdest time of the year to say, hey, Happy New Year. And what about midnight? Most people are asleep at that time, or as I've heard old-timers say, decent people are asleep at midnight. We don't normally stay up till midnight. We aren't out working, that's for sure, unless you're on night shift, which is a minority compared to the majority who work when it's daylight. Even the Messiah said in John chapter 9 verse 4, "The night cometh when no man can work." The Hebrews reckoned day and night by the rising and setting of the sun. Daytime was from sunrise to sunset, while nighttime was from sunset to sunrise. Makes all the sense in the world. We wake up in the morning, we work, and we go to bed in the evening, or maybe a little later into the night. In older times, before electricity was invented, most people didn't do much after it got dark. I experienced this when I lived in an Amish community in old western Tennessee, and we have no electricity, so we would do all of our work during the day, and sometimes after sundown we get the oil lamps out. We might read the children a historical account in the scriptures or something like that, but we didn't do a whole lot because you couldn't see. We were in a valley, and then we would lay in bed until it got light enough to where we could actually start stirring around, and by of course sunrise we were ready to go again. What people are saying is, me and you can be laying in the woods at midnight on January 1st 2020, and I can nudge you and say, hey, a new year just began. How in the world do I know? What in the world is taking place naturally in the heavens, celestially, or in just common sense, that would let me know that we went from one year to another year, and from one day to another day? That doesn't make any sense. So why did the Roman New Year move from March 1, a new moon, to January 1, not a new moon, strictly solar? Well, in Ovid's Fasti in Book 3, he explains that the great god, Julius Caesar, declared that the new year would begin now in January the 1st rather than on March the 1st, and that the moon would be disregarded in calculating the calendar, and they would go by a strictly solar calendar.
The decision to add January and February to the existing 10 months was made, and the call to begin the new year in January was due to the revering of the two-faced God of new beginnings, gates, and doors, Janus. According to reference works, Julius Caesar took the advice of an astronomer named Sosigenes to disregard the moon in calculating the calendar and strictly follow a solar-only calendar. So what we've got today is a derivative of Julius Caesar's invention. Some of our calendar is pretty much man-made, and some of it is solar-based to keep us in somewhat alignment with the seasons. The moon is entirely ignored, which is a deviation from the old Roman calendar, and most importantly, a deviation from our Creator's calendar in Scripture, which uses both the sun and the moon, Genesis 1:14 through 18. So why not go back to the beginning? Now, of course, we have to follow our current American Julian Gregorian calendar for commercial reasons or business reasons. I can imagine if I told a customer of mine, said, hey, I'll be there on Abib the 25th during the 5th hour of the daylight period. They'd probably hang the phone up on me and say, I'm going with another company. But I can follow Yahweh's calendar in worship to Him. I began to do this over 20 years ago, and I haven't looked back. I've tried my best to worship Him according to what He commands, rather than what man dictates. So the next time you say or hear somebody say Happy New Year in the dead of winter on January the 1st at midnight, just remember that you are saying that because some pagan in antiquity thought it best to honor a two-faced God of new beginnings. That's something to think about.